Welcome to part 2 of Magic and Dota 2's main world. In this video, we're going to go over 3 topics: genetics in Magic, Anti-Magic, and Divine Magic. Let's begin. On the topic of genetics in Dota Magic, Silencer is the prime example, his background showing that genetics actually do play a role in magical ability. From his lore, part of the 7th and final generation of a carefully designed pedigree, Nortrum was bred by the ancient order of the Ealdrias to be the greatest magic user the world had ever seen. This didn't work out as they had planned. Silencer doesn't cast spells at all, nor has he shown the ability to be able to. Given that the order tried though, and that the pedigree was 7 generations long, it's clear that parentage may be an extremely important factor for magical talent. It's also likely that, unless the Ealdrias imported talented mages for breeding stock, Silencer is heavily inbred. Before going further, some information on inbreeding. Contrary to popular belief, inbreeding doesn't actually create problems just by virtue of being inbreeding. What it does is increase the likelihood of recessive traits being passed on. Since family members share a great deal of genetic material, the likelihood of these recessive traits expressing increases dramatically. This is massive speculation based on nothing but the possibility of Silencer being inbred, so take it with a heap of salt, but my pet theory is that Silencer's lack of magic might be a rare recessive trait. Of course, it could also be a million other things, like him just not caring. Again, salt. Going forward with Silencer, let's discuss Anti-Magic. From his lore, and then his preceptors learned a valuable lesson: a lack of magic can be the greatest magic of all. Nortrum silenced the young mages one by one and defeated them in single combat until he alone stood as champion of the Ealdrias in fulfillment of the prophecy. What this tells us is that incantations are extremely important to the ability to cast spells. To reiterate, the goal of the Ealdrias was to create the most powerful mage the world has ever known. What they got instead was a warrior who could defeat any mage, no matter how powerful, by bringing them down to his level. Hence the line, a lack of magic can be the greatest magic of all. Now, where does his power stem from? His background makes it clear that whether or not he truly is incapable of magic, he didn't display any magical talent during his training. Unless he practiced his anti-magic abilities in secret, it's safe to assume that they're natural, perhaps a result of his breeding. Based primarily on his responses, Silencer's abilities appear to be twofold. 1. Silencing, as in literally stopping sound, thus preventing incantations, and 2. Absorbing the intelligence of those he defeats. These traits may imply that Silencer's abilities have some kind of psionic origin, but there is unfortunately too little information to confirm. No discussion of anti-magic, though, would be complete without Anti-Mage. Unlike Silencer, who appears to be completely without magic of any kind, Anti-Mage makes use of mana extensively enough for 2 characters to comment on it.
Anti-Mage, your dependence on mana is unholy!
Keep your mana, Anti-Mage. It's your life I want.
It's likely that these comments are made to highlight Anti-Mage's apparent hypocrisy on magic, but looking at the lore behind Anti-Mage's abilities, it might not be so hypocritical. Blink makes no reference to magical nature and so cannot be commented on with certainty. I will admit though that it does seem magical, but so do abilities from psionics like Templar Assassin. Spell Shield is stated to be the result of intense meditation and mental focus. This may lend worth to the idea that Blink is psionic in nature. This leaves Mana Break and Mana Void, both of which involve manipulating the mana of other beings. Mana Break's description makes reference to being a modified technique of the Turstarkuri monks under which Anti-Mage served as an acolyte. Mana Break and Void, while obviously dealing directly with mana, may not actually be spells so much as more fundamental manipulations of mana in its base form, and is in that respect similar to a few other abilities in the game, namely Lion's Mana Drain, and Keeper of the Light's Mana Leak and Chakra Magic. I also took into consideration Pugna's Life Drain, but decided against including it as an example as it converts life force into mana rather than working with mana the whole time. How do these differ from true spells though? Here's an analogy. Consider mages to be cooks. They have their ingredients, mana, and they use them to create products, spells. Anti-Mage never leaves the ingredient stage. He runs into the kitchen and throws the cook's ingredients all over the floor. When they're frantically trying to clean up, he kicks them in the teeth. Because Anti-Mage doesn't actually do anything other than mess up other people's ingredients, he's not a cook. For our final topic of this series, we'll discuss Divine Magic. First off, what is it? To classify something as divine magic, I would say that it has to pass two tests. The first is that the magic is given to one being from another being or force, usually for fealty or favors. The second is that the magic must be powered by that being or force, and so falling out of favor with them may cause the recipient to lose their power. Here are two quick examples of how these rules apply. Magnus wouldn't count, because though his abilities are powered by Mount Jorlak, it's an inanimate geographical formation and so can't grant or deny anything to anyone, failing Test 1. Vengeful Spirit also wouldn't count, because though she was granted her power by the goddess Skriok, it's a mixture of her own arcane skill and her thirst for revenge that powers her, so she fails Test 2. So who does count as a divine caster? By my quick count, probably non-exhaustive, Omni Knight, Tidehunter, Luna and Mirana, and Undying. As a priest of the Omniscience, most of Omni Knight's abilities are learned rather than granted. The known exception is Guardian Angel, which calls on the Omniscience's intervention to protect him and his allies. And, with the possible exception of Gush, Tidehunter doesn't seem to use magical abilities. However, Ravage is a direct summoning of Maelron, which actually sets Tidehunter apart from most divine casters who receive spells, not direct physical assistance. Luna and Mirana are both servants of the moon goddess Selamene, who intercedes for her followers more than most of the other known gods. All of their in-game abilities, for example, with the exception of Leap and Moonglaive, are direct spells from Selamene. However, the most prominent example of a divine caster is Undying. Once presumably human, Undying was defeated in battle by the dead god's armies and cast into, quote, the yawning pit of the dead god alongside his brothers. The pit is later referred to as, quote, the belly of the great nothing, so it's possible that Undying and his comrades were eaten by the dead god in whatever form that might take. In the pit, their minds were consumed by the dirge, a Lovecraftian music that erased all thought but hunger, and they eventually ate each other. Whether Undying survived that ordeal or died but was incapable of passing on while in the pit is unclear. But what ended up happening is that the dirge continued in his mind until it completely consumed his consciousness. From then on, he was the, quote, herald of the dead god, and was tasked with spreading the dirge and raising the dead. Because of these events, it can be assumed that all of Undying's current magical abilities, along with his immortality, are granted directly to him from the dead god, and it is the dead god that raises him again and again. This makes Undying a pure divine caster. As a final side note, let's look at the dead god's name. The dead god, not the death god or the god of the dead, but the dead god. Is this an actual god that had died? Is it a god that was always dead? Given its Lovecraftian trait of driving people insane in its presence, is it a god at all? Is it just a different way of saying the god of the dead in the same way that no one says the farmer of the wheat when they can just say the wheat farmer? I just thought it was interesting and look forward to the possibility of Valve expanding more on it. That's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I apologize this one took so long. Thanks for watching.